Imagine waking up to a United States map that looks entirely different, where familiar state lines have shifted and new borders have emerged. Recent events suggest that this scenario might not be as far-fetched as it seems. Across the nation, various regions are expressing desires to redraw boundaries, driven by cultural, political, and economic differences. In this video, we'll explore 10 states with active movements aiming to secede or reconfigure their affiliations within the Union. Number 1. Oregon's Greater Idaho Movement. What if a part of a state decided it no longer belonged? That's exactly what's happening in Eastern Oregon, where a growing number of residents want to redraw the map and become part of Idaho. The Greater Idaho Movement, fueled by dissatisfaction with Oregon's left-leaning policies, argues that rural communities in the East share stronger cultural, economic, and political ties with conservative Idaho. The idea isn't just a wild theory. 13 counties have already voted in favor of considering the transition. Supporters of the movement claim that their values and way of life are overshadowed by the progressive urban centers like Portland, which dominate state politics. Their argument is simple. Why stay in a state that doesn't represent them when there's a neighboring one that does? The push gained serious traction in early 2025 when Republican lawmakers introduced a bill to formally study the feasibility of moving Oregon's border eastward. While changing state borders is no easy task, it requires approval from both Oregon and Idaho as well as Congress. The movement's momentum is undeniable. Could we soon see an Idaho that stretches far beyond its current borders? That remains to be seen, but the conversation is far from over. Number 2. California's Independence Initiative. California, often seen as a world of its own, has long entertained the idea of breaking away from the United States entirely. With the 5th largest economy in the world, the Golden State holds significant influence, and some believe it could thrive as an independent nation. The Yes California movement, also known as Calexit, argues that the state's progressive policies, diverse economy, and distinct cultural identity set it apart from the rest of the country. Advocates for secession claim that California contributes more to the federal government than it receives and should have full control over its own governance. However, the road to independence is steep. Secession would require approval from both Congress and California voters, making it a near impossible legal challenge. Still, the movement remains a symbol of the growing divide between California and the rest of the U.S., with its supporters continuing to push for a future where California stands alone. Number 3. Illinois' new state proposals. In Illinois, a stark contrast between the urban powerhouse of Chicago and the rural heartland has fueled a movement for separation. Many residents outside the city believe that Chicago's dominance in state politics leaves their concerns ignored, leading to calls for a new state, often referred to as New Illinois. Supporters argue that rural areas face different economic struggles and cultural priorities, and they feel disconnected from policies crafted in Chicago. In recent elections, several counties voted in favor of exploring the idea of breaking away, a sign of increasing frustration with the current political structure. While the likelihood of splitting from Illinois remains low, since statehood changes require both state and federal approval, the movement highlights the growing tension between rural and urban America. Whether or not Illinois sees an actual division, the push for a separate state reveals deep-seated concerns about fair representation and governance. Number 4. Texas's Texit movement. Few states in the U.S. have a history as unique as Texas, which was once an independent republic before joining the Union in 1845. That independent spirit still runs deep, fueling the Texit movement, a push to revisit the idea of Texas as its own nation. Advocates argue that Texas, with its massive economy, rich natural resources, and distinct cultural identity could thrive without federal oversight. The movement gained significant attention in 2023 when the Texas Independence Referendum Act was introduced, aiming to put the question of secession directly to voters. While the bill ultimately failed, it demonstrated that a significant number of Texans are dissatisfied with Washington's control and believe their state should have the right to self-governance. Despite the enthusiasm of its supporters, legal and constitutional barriers make secession an uphill battle. The U.S. Supreme Court has previously ruled that states cannot unilaterally leave the Union, meaning any attempt to do so would likely be met with fierce opposition from the federal government. Nonetheless, the debate over Texit remains a powerful symbol of Texas' long-standing struggle between state sovereignty and federal authority. Whether or not Texas will ever take steps toward independence, the movement is a reminder that the idea of secession is still very much alive in the Lone Star State. Number 5. New Hampshire's Independence Drive. New Hampshire, known for its strong libertarian streak, has seen a growing movement pushing for separation from the United States. The state's famous motto, "Live free or die," isn't just a slogan. It reflects a deep commitment to personal liberties and minimal government interference. The New Hampshire Liberty Party, founded in 2012, has been at the forefront of advocating for state independence, arguing that the federal government's overreach undermines the rights and freedoms of its citizens. Secession advocates believe that New Hampshire, with its low taxes, small government, and independent-minded population, could function more effectively as its own sovereign entity rather than under federal rule. While the idea of breaking away from the U.S. has been dismissed by many as unrealistic, it has gained enough traction to be formally debated in the state's legislature. Though no major steps have been taken toward secession, the movement highlights a broader dissatisfaction with centralized government control. Whether or not New Hampshire ever makes a serious attempt to leave the Union, the independence drive reflects a wider national trend, growing frustration among states that feel increasingly disconnected from federal decision-making. Number 6. Alaska's Independence Party. Alaska, the largest and most remote state in the U.S., has always maintained a sense of independence that sets it apart from the rest of the country. The Alaskan Independence Party, AIP, has been a key advocate for secession, arguing that the state could thrive on its own due to its vast natural resources, including oil, gas, and fisheries. Founded in the 1980s, the AIP has long pushed for a vote to determine whether Alaskans truly want to remain part of the U.S. or become an independent nation. Supporters believe that federal regulations stifle Alaska's economic potential, and that the state should have full control over its own policies without interference from Washington. Despite its persistence, the movement has faced significant legal roadblocks. In 2006, the Alaska Supreme Court ruled that secession is unconstitutional, making any attempt at independence a nearly impossible endeavor. However, this hasn't stopped the party from remaining active, continually raising awareness about state rights and the idea that Alaskans should have the final say over their own governance. While secession may not be a realistic option, the AIP's presence highlights ongoing frustrations with federal control over Alaska's land, economy, and natural resources. The movement serves as a reminder that even in the modern era, the idea of self-determination remains a powerful force in the state's political landscape. Number 7. Hawaii's sovereignty movement. Hawaii's independence movement isn't just about politics. It's deeply tied to history, identity, and the preservation of indigenous Hawaiian culture. Advocates argue that the U.S. annexation of Hawaii in 1898 was illegal, carried out without the consent of the Hawaiian people, and in violation of international law. The sovereignty movement seeks to restore Hawaii's status as an independent nation, undoing more than a century of American control. Over the years, the push for independence has taken many forms, from grassroots activism to legal challenges demanding recognition of Hawaii's historical sovereignty. The movement gained traction in 1993 when the U.S. government formally apologized for its role in the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy, acknowledging the injustices faced by the native population. While full independence remains unlikely due to legal and political barriers, the movement has achieved some victories. The establishment of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, OHA, has provided resources for indigenous communities, and legislative measures have been introduced to recognize the cultural and historical grievances of Native Hawaiians. Many supporters argue that, at the very least, Hawaii deserves more autonomy over its land, economy, and governance, separate from U.S. federal control. Though the dream of a fully independent Hawaii may still be far off, the sovereignty movement continues to be a significant force, ensuring that the voices of Native Hawaiians and their historical claims to self-determination are never forgotten. Number 8. Vermont's Second Republic. Vermont, known for its independent spirit and progressive politics, has a history unlike most other states. Before joining the Union in 1791, Vermont operated as an independent republic for 14 years. And some Vermonters believe it should reclaim that status. The Second Vermont Republic, a secessionist movement founded in 2003, advocates for the state's independence, arguing that Vermont's values are increasingly at odds with federal policies. Supporters of the movement express frustration with corporate influence in Washington and believe that a smaller, self-sustaining government would better serve Vermont's citizens. One of the central ideas behind Vermont's independence movement is localism, the belief that small community-driven governance is more effective than centralized federal rule. Advocates argue that Vermont, with its strong focus on environmental sustainability, local agriculture, and direct democracy, could function more effectively on its own, rather than being tied to the political and economic interests of the broader United States. They highlight the state's history of prioritizing social policies such as universal health care, renewable energy initiatives, and community-driven economies, all of which they feel are undermined by federal intervention. Despite its passionate supporters, Vermont's independence movement remains largely symbolic, with little political momentum for actual secession. While the idea of Vermont breaking away might seem far-fetched, the movement serves as a reminder of the growing discontent among states that feel disconnected from federal decision-making. Whether or not Vermont ever seriously considers independence, the Second Vermont Republic keeps the conversation alive, pushing for greater autonomy and self-reliance within the state. Number 9. South Carolina's Third Palmetto Republic. South Carolina has a long and complicated history with secession, being the first state to leave the Union in 1860, triggering the Civil War. But while that attempt ended in defeat, some South Carolinians still believe the state should reclaim its independence. In 2010, a group calling itself the Third Palmetto Republic emerged, advocating for a free and sovereign South Carolina. The movement, referencing the state's past declarations of independence, is driven by concerns over federal overreach, economic autonomy, and a desire for local governance without interference from Washington. Supporters of the movement argue that South Carolina's cultural identity and economic needs are distinct enough to justify a break from the U.S. They cite concerns over excessive federal taxation, government regulations, and national policies that they believe don't align with the values of the state's residents. The movement also draws from libertarian ideals, emphasizing personal freedoms, states' rights, and opposition to what they see as an overbearing federal bureaucracy. While the Third Palmetto Republic isn't a mainstream political force, its message resonates with a segment of the population that views South Carolina's sovereignty as a legitimate discussion rather than just historical nostalgia. Realistically, South Carolina is unlikely to secede, as the legal and political barriers to such a move are nearly insurmountable. However, the movement is a reflection of a broader national debate over state sovereignty and federal authority. Even if independence never becomes a reality, the Third Palmetto Republic continues to stoke discussions about the balance of power between states and the federal government, keeping the issue alive in South Carolina's political discourse. Number 10. Florida's Conch Republic. Not all secession movements are driven by political frustration. Some are born out of humor and local pride. That's exactly the case with the Conch Republic, a self-declared micronation that was formed in Key West, Florida in 1982. The story behind its creation is both amusing and symbolic. After the U.S. Border Patrol set up a checkpoint on the only road connecting Key West to the mainland, frustrated residents, led by the town's mayor, humorously declared their independence from the United States. They even went as far as appointing a prime minister and issuing their own passports, turning what started as a protest into an enduring symbol of Florida's quirky and rebellious spirit. While the Conch Republic isn't a serious secession movement, it has become a beloved part of Key West's identity, attracting tourists from around the world. The annual Conch Republic Days festival, featuring parades, mock battles, and flag-raising ceremonies, serves as a reminder of the region's fiercely independent nature. The movement, though lighthearted, carries an underlying message about local governance and resistance to unnecessary government intervention. Unlike other independence movements that push for real political change, the Conch Republic exists more as a cultural symbol than a political statement. It represents a community that values its uniqueness and isn't afraid to challenge authority, even if only in a playful way. Though Key West remains firmly part of the United States, the legacy of the Conch Republic continues to thrive, proving that sometimes the most enduring independence movements are the ones that don't take themselves too seriously. While the idea of states breaking away from the United States might seem far-fetched, these movements reveal a deeper conversation about identity, governance, and autonomy. Whether it's serious secession efforts like Texas's Texit, or the symbolic rebellion of Florida's Conch Republic, these movements reflect real frustrations, cultural differences, and historical legacies that continue to shape the nation. Some of these efforts may never gain legal traction, while others will continue to challenge the balance of power between states and the federal government. So, what does the future hold? Could we see a reshaped America in the coming decades? Or will these movements remain symbolic expressions of dissatisfaction? One thing is certain: the debates over state sovereignty and independence are far from over. What do you think? Should any of these states actually break away? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the world's most fascinating stories. Thanks for watching Discovering the Earth, and we'll see you in the next video.